to another episode in the podcast called Labor Matters, where I address trending issues and queries relating to employment, specifically within the Barbadian context. I'm Michelle Russell, attorney at law, and I have a passion for employment law and labor rights. I'm also a social activist and focus primarily on issues relating to labor law. I'm also a columnist for The Nation newspaper, where I write articles in the Sunday Sun addressing employment rights and other labor issues. So if you want to know more about your employment rights, please remember to get your copy of the Sunday Sun. Now for this week's episode, I wanted to touch more on the human element, because usually I address things such as the legislation and the law relating to certain aspects of employment law, but I wanted to address the human side of employment that I actually see extremely often. Now, as a labor attorney, persons tend to come to me when they're having issues in employment, whether it's an employer seeking my advice in respect of disciplinary measures, contractual measures, or policies relating to employment, or employees who are having issues at work, including but not limited to disciplinary action being taken against them and termination. And it is the latter that I really wanted to address, because more often than not, by the time an employee comes to me, they have already been terminated or termination is in train. And I witness the emotional impact that a termination can have on an employee, and I wanted to address that. And to be fair, the emotional impact is not limited to the employees only. It often also applies to the employer. And that is what I mean today. So this week's episode, I call it the breakup. And I wanted to look at it from the human element, because more often than not, the ending of an employment relationship will have with it very similar emotions as you experience with the breakup of any other kind of relationship, whether romantic, familial, or friendship. And that is because the employment relationship is an extremely delicate one, and I think we often fail to realize just how delicate it is. And this is because if we truly consider it, we spend more time at work than doing anything else. In its simplest, most basic form, most persons work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. There are some people who work on weekends as well, and there are tons of people who regularly work overtime. So that when you put together those hours, you spend more time at your job, or doing your job, or being connected to your job than any other activity, more than your children, more than your family life, hobbies, etc. And for that reason, a lot of who we are is actually wrapped up in our employment, so that a large part of our identity is wrapped up in what we do for a living. Now, this includes the routines we have daily. It includes how we earn a living, how much we earn for a living, and of course, it includes your qualifications, because more often than not, you studied for the job you have. More often than not, you went to university, did courses, etc., all in the name of the particular industry you are in, and in relation to your life goals. So that your employment is directly connected to this part of your identity, and more often than not, what you do for a living will spill over into your social life, your family life. Your political opinions might be influenced by your employment, etc. And finally, our employment influences a lot of the relationships we have, because as I said before, we spend most of our time at work more than anywhere else. So we develop relationships with co-workers. They might be friendships, sometimes it's dating relationships, and at the very least we have a working relationship with our co-workers. But consider this: when you have worked in an institution for over a decade, sometimes 2 decades and 3 decades, you form long-term and deep relationships with a lot of your co-workers, with your bosses, your superiors, and even your subordinates. So that you might find over that period of time, there were sacrifices you made in the name of the business. There were sacrifices you made for other co-workers, whether picking up the slack for another co-worker, whether working extra hours, not turning up for your children's graduation or important events in your own personal life, because you're doing something for the betterment of the business, for the betterment of a group of employees in your department. And as employers, sometimes over that 20 and 30 years, you might have formed your own little personal relationship with your employees. You might have given them company loans. You might have been with them through sickness of a family member or of the employee, so that you create this kind of bond. So after all of that time, all of that physical, mental, emotional investment, and sometimes a financial one, when the relationship comes to an end, whether by resignation, termination, or redundancy, and especially if it occurs abruptly, you didn't see it coming, you didn't expect it, or it happened in a short period of time, you go through a number of what could be confusing emotions. And I say this because I deal with it almost on a daily basis, because like I said, by the time most come to me, they've already been terminated, or the termination has been set in train. And I often find I have to hold their hands through what are delicate feelings, and I watch them struggle to deal with these feelings. And I thought it would be essential if I could share some of the tips I share with my own clients, for those who might be experiencing something similar, to help you navigate what can be a very uncertain period when your employment comes to an end and you're experiencing emotions that you're not really sure what to do with. You're not sure what direction your life will take after this, especially if you were in a job for a very long time. And I want to just be able to approach the human side and help you. So I just have a few tips, right? The first thing you'll realize is that when an employment comes to an end, you're going to go through a period of mourning. And to be clear, this is on both sides. I've seen employers mourn the loss of long-term employees, especially if they were valuable employees. And of course, I've seen employees mourn the loss of a job. So you're going to experience feelings of sadness, sometimes despair, but hopefully not. But, very low feelings, because you might have lost a job you loved. A job you saw yourself staying in for a long period, or a job you saw yourself being elevated in, growing in. You would have lost a livelihood, which is essentially something to do. Something to wake up to in the mornings that you're going to do. And some of us are creatures of habit. I'm a creature of habit. I like routines. And when you take that away, all of a sudden it's like, how do I fill this space? Especially if you are not one who had a work-life balance, so that most of you is wrapped up in what you do. All of a sudden there's this gap and you need to try to fill it. Of course, there's the obvious loss of income. And if you don't have enough savings or other things in place, you're going to worry about how you're going to pay your bills, how you're going to meet your obligations, reaching out to the financial institutions, looking after your family, buying food, applying for unemployment benefits, etc. There's going to be the loss of the relationships with your co-workers, because some people struggle after they leave to maintain those relationships, sometimes because of the circumstances that surrounded how the job ended. And others, it's just the lack of proximity makes it more difficult. And then, of course, like I mentioned before, the loss of identity. Who am I now? Who am I if I'm not an attorney? Who am I if I'm not an activist? Who am I if I'm not a restaurant worker or a banker? Who am I? And there's that little period that it can be very uncomfortable and unsettling. But one thing I feel we don't address is the lost years. Because one thing I hear a lot of employees say is, I gave up so much of my life for this company. I've been there for 20 and 30 and 40 years. And you begin to look back in your mind and feel like you gave it up for no reason. It feels like a wasted period of your life. And those are valid feelings, because feelings, they're neither good or bad. They just are. Whether they're negative or not, you have to allow yourself to process them, walk through them, no point denying it, and confront them, face them. And I invite you to consider another perspective over wasted years. They might not have in fact been wasted. It was just a season of your life, a season that would have brought education, learning, growth in so many ways, and a season that you can choose to make useful toward your future. So here are a few tips to get through this mourning period that I have given to clients in the past, and most of them have said they found it useful, and I'm hoping it can help some of those of you who might be struggling right now. And the first thing I would like to say is, allow yourself to mourn. There is no proper way to mourn the loss of a job. I will not say to you, don't cry or cry. Don't think about it, forget about it. There's no proper way, but you have to acknowledge the feelings are there. And you might be conflicted, because sometimes you miss a job that treated you badly, and you feel guilty. And you're like, oh, I could only be a fool to miss those people who mistreated me all this time. No, feelings aren't good or bad. They just are. Allow yourself to mourn. Don't give it a time frame. Don't allow it to overtake your life, but don't deny that it's there. The second thing I would say is be kind to yourself. It is so easy to end up in this cycle where we're in our heads and we're beating up ourselves for everything we think we did wrong. All the ways we think we did wrong. And I see with employers too, especially if it was a valued employee that they believe they made a lot of allowances for. They gave extra time off, they paid them extra bonuses, this employee could do things other employees couldn't do, and then all of a sudden they get this new job and they've abandoned. So there's this experience and our feeling of betrayal. How could they? But we need to all remember, no one belongs to us. Not our spouses, not our children, not our employees, not our employer, not our job. So we have to be able to let go of these feelings of betrayal and be kind to ourselves. You can only do as much as you know with the knowledge you have at the time. So you can look back and think of all the ways you sacrificed for the company that you shouldn't have, all the things you gave up. You might have blamed your divorce on your job and know that you lost the job or they let you go. You say to yourself, man, I should have never given up my wife for that, and look at how foolish I am. Be kind to yourself. You made the decisions based on the knowledge you had at the time. Which leads to the next point, which is engage in self-forgiveness. None of us get it right all of the time. Not one of us. No matter how well-meaning, no matter how soul-searching or self-aware, not one of us will get it right all the time. So you're going to have to learn to forgive yourself for the mistakes you made, including mistakes that might have led to your termination, including mistakes that might have led to you making a valued employee redundant, or the reasons you might have had to resign, because some people resign from a job not because they don't love it anymore, but because they need more money. You have to forgive yourself for those things. Don't feel, or at least don't allow the feeling of betrayal to overshadow you. You make decisions based on the knowledge you have at the time you have it. The next one is the one where you start, I'd say a week or two after you're coming out of the period of mourning. You're going to have to redefine yourself, because let us be practical. You won't always be able to find back a job in your industry or a job at the level you are used to operating. So you might have to redefine yourself. And this can take so many forms. One of them is re-education. You might want to explore doing other jobs, doing other courses, and finding out where the demands are in the current labor market. And a good way to determine this, is to follow the newspapers. Get your nation newspaper, look in the classifieds, look at the job openings, look online for job openings, look on LinkedIn, and see where the demand is. Because you are more likely to get a job in the industries that are hiring than in yours that might be slow. So if you find that it's focused more in one area than another and you can retrain to be qualified for that area, I suggest that you do. NTI, National Training Initiative, I don't know if you've seen the ads. I certainly have. They have this Coursera thing. It's called Coursera, where you have these free online courses paid for by the government that offers you this very tool to retrain. If you want to find out more information, you can go on their website. I don't know what the website is, but I'm sure if you Google National Training Initiative Barbados, I know on IG they are NTI Starvation, and it tells you a lot about the courses. I know they also have a roadshow where they're going around to various communities advising of the courses that they have. So that this will offer you an opportunity, because now you're unemployed, you might not have access to certain funds to pay for retraining, but at least with this, you can retrain without money being pulled from your pocket, because right now you also need to watch your finances. So you have to redefine yourself, what you're willing to do, the kind of jobs you're willing to take up, whether you're willing to retrain, etc. And reach out to persons you know. Don't be proud. Reach out to those around you who might have a connection to helping you get another job, or who can advise you on a way to go. Because sometimes while you are working in this one job, people might have said, have you ever considered sales? I think you'd do good in sales. And you brush it off and you say, no man, that's not for me. But now that you have the opportunity to redefine yourself, you might want to explore why it is people thought you would be good in sales, and see if maybe it's something that interests you, and maybe it's something that you'd actually be good at and excel in. The other thing is, take time off. More often than not, because we're worried about financial obligations, we try to run from one job to the next. The best way to heal is time, and time where you get to rest, where you get rejuvenation, and and you get to relax, because those things do wonders for the brain. And there are lots of scientific studies that speak about how the right kind of rest and focusing on the right kind of things can help to create new neural pathways in your brain that help you to learn to think differently. So that I do encourage, if you can afford it and there's no rush back to work and no present opportunity, don't spend the time agitating and being miserable about being stuck at home, Find ways to relax. Find ways to be mindful. Use mindfulness practice. Find ways to engage in hobbies that bring some kind of satisfaction and release the endorphins and the positive kind of emotions that will help your brain to reset itself. If you find you're struggling, weeks later, months later, and you're still struggling to deal with the loss of the job, I encourage you to reach out to a coach, a counselor, a psychiatrist, or any kind of support system that can help you to make sense of all the years you spent at the company and why you're struggling to get past it. If you believe your dismissal might not have been fair, I also encourage you to reach out to the labor office, reach out to a trade union representative, or to an employment attorney to get some advice. Because sometimes, depending on the circumstances surrounding the redundancy or the termination, you might be able to have a right of action. You might be able to get back your job if that's what you want, or get back a similar job in the same workplace, or you might be able to get compensation. The last thing I would say is budget, budget, budget. You're going to have to face the fact that right now you are without any income except what might be unemployment benefits, and if you know how those work, they don't come regularly, they generally don't come on time, and they only last for 6 months. Budget will be important. You have to be willing to adjust your lifestyle, and sometimes that means making hard decisions. You might have to refinance your mortgage if it's possible. You might have to move out of the property and rent it out or sell it. If you're renting, you might have to seek a cheaper property. You might have to give up the cars you're used to and some of the lifestyle you're used to. But that's fine, because these things tend to be temporary. But if you dig your heels in and you're trying to maintain the same lifestyle while having only 60% of your earnings through unemployment, you're either going to burn through your savings very quickly, or you're going to frustrate yourself in the process because you'll be constantly worrying about all the money you're spending while money is not coming in, or while sufficient money isn't coming in. So you have to be willing to make those hard decisions and re-budget. Hopefully, soon enough, you'll be able to find a new job. And you might find when you first go, you experience some sort of anxiety and agitation because your trust might have been broken, especially where you were in the previous job for a very long time and the circumstances surrounding your separation were unpleasant. Be kind to yourself. Allow yourself with time and with knowledge of the new employer to relax enough to trust them enough. But I always say, as long as you're an employee, you're disposable. And that's something you must remember. No matter how high to the top you are disposable. So be careful how much of your time and energy you give to something that might not matter on your deathbed. Because when you are in sickness or dying and you look back with regrets, you often say stuff like, I wish I spent more time with my family. And you normally look at relationships. You look at parts of yourself you neglected, hobbies you wanted to pursue, and things you're just generally passionate about. So give good work, give good service, and help to build the company, because if the company is doing well, more than likely it means your job will remain a little more secure. But don't neglect yourself completely in the process. I hope this podcast will help those of you who have been struggling due to a recent termination that you still haven't made sense of. So thank you for listening, and until next time, let us all adhere to good labor practices. See you then.